What's interesting is it felt like a second place trophy. Think
Yeah.
about the feeling that you would feel if somebody came along and offered to buy Hospitality FM. Like just
Yeah.
let's say it was a ton of money,
Yeah.
more money than you've ever seen or grew up with. And think about that feeling that you'd feel, and you'd think from the outside looking in, it'd be like the equivalent of the
You made
champagne
it.
popping emoji.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like incredible. But what I thought was, okay, we just got started.
Mm,
We know this is going to be an exceptional product. We haven't even started marching on our mission yet.
yeah.
We have to do this. But I still think if you fast forward 3 years in the future, 5 years in the future, 10 years in the future, I still think it feels like a
Mm,
second place trophy. And then
mm,
what does that do to you? You still may sell, by the way. You still may
yeah.
sell, you
Yeah.
still may exit, you still may whatever. But what do you think that does to you? You know what it does? It makes you build again. It makes you
Yeah.
build again because you're unsatisfied with the outcome. It's always this unsatisfaction with the outcome, and you have to build. So,
Mm.
um, yeah, I think you're stuck doing it.
You're listening to Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast, a podcast for those who are in and around the hospitality industry who love, live, and breathe what they do. You can join us for candid and unscripted conversations with hospitality experts and founders as we go deeper into their personal stories while they're sharing their triumphs and trials that got them to where they are today. I'm your host, Will Slickers, and you're listening to an episode of Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast. Now, let's begin. All right, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Will Slickers. And if you haven't heard the show before, I sit down, I interview founders in the hospitality space, whether they are from short-term rentals to hotels to restaurants to technology to investing. And we're going to sit down with Corey Ashton Walters, who is the CEO and founder of Here. So, Corey, welcome to the show, my friend. And I'm super excited because you also have a really nice microphone. So, it's not as often as you would think we would get a guest that has really good audio quality as well. So, welcome to the show.
Great to meet, Will. Great to meet. Yeah, I get teased a lot for this microphone. I'll meet with like investors, I'll meet with people, and they're like, "Oh, we've got a podcaster here," and I'm like, "Listen, just because I've got a nice mic doesn't mean I'm a podcaster, even though I probably have aspirations to being a podcaster." But yeah, I know I like having a nice mic. You know, it's like if we're gonna be working from home, you might as well, bless the ears of whoever's on the other side with like decent audio. We've all been on like a call with somebody that has like some weird like headpiece in that like it
Oh, yeah.
sounds like the mic's like inside of their mouth and
Oh,
there's like
yeah.
all this background noise and so yeah, why not?
To the investors, tell them the future of work from home is, everyone's going to have a microphone. Everyone. It's going to be the standard, and you know podcasting super easy. We got podcast networks out there that help you, so you could always join a network, right? You know what I'm
Nice
saying?
mic, nice camera. Yeah, why
Yeah.
not? Yeah.
Yeah, I
I'm
love
already
it.
set up. I'm ready
Well,
to go.
I know, I was gonna say, when do we launch? We can get you on Hospitality FM tomorrow.
Send the contract.
Perfect. I love it. I love it. Well, Corey, outside of your aspirations for podcasting, let's jump into your story because one, your company Here is very interesting. At least for me, I've never been the investor type of person. I've always, of course, downloaded Coinbase, did Robinhood when it first launched, like 2018, all this stuff. But you've gotten a pretty interesting background leading up to Here. So I'd love to just kind of hear where your story really starts as an entrepreneur, as just your personal growth and journey also begins.
Sure. Yeah. So before Here, I've been on quite the entrepreneurial journey. So I started my first company when I was 15 years old with a couple co-founders, a couple friends. It was a t-shirt printing company. So, or I should say, it was a t-shirt company that we printed screen printed designs on top of. It was called Air Eat. It was this really cool surfwear brand. We grew up in like a small town in Florida near the beach, and I don't know. I think we thought we were pretty cool at the time, and we sold the shirts out of like the trunk of my car. We sold them at like house parties and sporting events, high school sporting events, things like that. And I think we sold 100 150 shirts. We split the money at the end of the summer. I think we had like fun money, and that's what we did, and then
Yeah.
that was it. The business never returned. I don't think we made it through a full tax year. And yeah, I have little like starts and fits of entrepreneurism over the course of really the last 15 years. Um, Mainly in fashion was where I really got my start in design. Starting with Aerie when I was really young, but then fast forward into my 20s, I started a streetwear brand called Lurk that was um, at the time we had tens of thousands of customers, and we were
Mm.
stocked in a very large company at the time called Karmaloop, which was like the Macy's or Nordstrom of the streetwear industry. And Yeah, it was an interesting ride, specifically in fashion. Fast forward about a decade, and I started a company called Homeworthy. It was my first tech company that I had a co-founder. His name was Tudor Bay. At the time, he was working at Apple, and with this idea, we felt like people living in small town America were underserved in the tools and technology at their disposal to sell a house. So still pretty true to this day. You pick up like look at a random real estate listing in small town America. The photos look kind of crappy. The real estate
Mhm.
agent doesn't do a whole lot of effort in regards to preparing the listing and making it look superb. And we thought, well, what if we brought big city tools and technology to small town homeowners looking to sell a
Mm.
home? So drone aerials, 3D scans, video walkthroughs, things you'd expect in a real estate listing in Miami or Atlanta or New York,
Yeah.
but people living in a small town. So somebody lives in a town less than 1,000 or 2,000 people. So we launched with that thesis in 2019, the Pacific Northwest, specifically Vancouver, Washington. And over the
Okay.
course of about a year, we grew to about 900 small towns and cities across the entire Pacific Northwest in our service market.
Mm.
So grew pretty rapidly. Unfortunately, we kind of mistimed our growth as we were kind of reaching not our peak, but really starting to find product market fit. We walk into March of 2020, which
Yeah.
everybody remembers. March 2020 is very similar. It's like thinking about 9/11. It's like everybody remembers where they were and what they were doing when 9/11 happened. I think very
Yeah.
similar with middle of March of 2020. Everybody understood their life was going to change, or didn't understand it, but their life changed forever in many cases.
Yeah.
Um, After that moment, and in Homeworthy's case, it was a really interesting time because walking into that month, we were growing 20-30% month over month, which is pretty great for a startup. But
Mhm.
we built a fully remote way to sell a house during a time that nobody wanted to meet anybody in person. So in between March and April, we grew about 300% month over month.
Wow.
But the challenge was on the surface, we were still a real estate brokerage from a financial model standpoint. So we wouldn't get paid until these homes sold.
Mhm.
So not only were we growing, but our burn was increasing at a massive
Yeah.
rate. And at this point,
Yeah.
we only raised a small angel round. So unfortunately, we hit the end of our runway as a startup at probably the worst time possible, which was COVID. Then also you're finding product market fit. So it's a
Mm.
really, really hard time. And unfortunately, in April of 2020, I had to lay off my entire team, including myself, just to try and survive the summer. The goal was, well, as long as we survive the summer, maybe venture capital starts flowing back into startups, and because at the time it really froze. Um, and that was the goal. So we cut every expense we could. We laid off everybody, including myself, and we tried to ride out the summer. And unfortunately, we just couldn't get the magic back together once that summer passed. Our chart, so to speak, like a growth chart, was down. My team was happily unemployed. I was highly unmotivated and feeling very depressed myself. And we just didn't have the magic. It was a really tough time. And to add insult to injury, I was going through a divorce myself, and it was peak depression, about as low as you can
Mm.
go. And um, I needed to keep myself busy. I needed to find a way to get re-inspired. So I started picking up books and articles, whatever I could read, specifically books on stoicism, you name it, not just all
Yeah.
business, but just like philosophical, and really trying to find my way. And I stumbled upon this really interesting article right around the time Airbnb was going public from a company called
Mm.
Grandview Research. It was actually a research report. And in this research report, I found this metric that sent me down a rabbit hole that I'm still going down today, which the metric said by 2025, 75% of all travel and leisure spent in North America was going to be made by millennials or younger. And that was a pretty big determination, which essentially meant like, okay, next 4 or 5 years, the majority of dollars spent on flights, hotels, et cetera, are going to be driven by young people. And oh, by
Mhm.
the way, they prefer alternative accommodations when they travel. So they're renting RVs, they're camping, they're staying in Airbnbs, things like that. And the industry is largely fragmented. Everybody has a friend that runs an Airbnb. But the challenge is every time you stay in an Airbnb, it is largely unpredictable. You walk
Yes.
in, can I get into the unit? That's the
Yep.
first one. Does the door unlock? Does the code they give me unlock the door? Does the AC work? Why are there dirty plates in the sink?
Yeah.
The sheets have hairs in it. Like there's this constant, quality control that's uncertain when you check into an Airbnb. So I thought there's probably a pretty big opportunity here to take a fragmented industry and professionalize it. That was started to become kind of the seed of the idea for here, which was this massive millennial wave that's coming. That's really going to drive the industry forward, and a highly fragmented asset class, which are short-term vacation rentals. So that was the kind of seed of the idea for here. But I'd be lying to you if I didn't say that the company you see today isn't the company that we started working on. We really wanted to build this idea of kind of like roof stock for vacation rentals. Are you familiar with roof stock?
I think I know the name. I don't know if I'd actually know the concept
Yeah. So they buy single family homes, they fill them with a tenant, and then they sell them to an investor and then manage it for that investor. It's called like turnkey real estate investing. So they make it really easy for like the average person that has money to invest in real estate without having to really lift a finger. So that's their business model, but they do single family homes, like regular rentals. Like I live in a rental. I don't know if you own or live in a rental, but like a regular house, that's what they do. So we thought, well, what if we did that for vacation rentals? And the challenge was we couldn't get loans on them. That was the biggest problem. It was very hard to get a loan for somebody. Short-term vacation rentals, it's a very fragmented industry for lending as well. And I thought it's gonna be too small of a business model or too small of a market because you basically can only sell to people that can buy these with cash. So went back to the drawing board and was like, okay, this isn't going to work. I slowly stumbled upon Masterworks through a podcast. Actually, one of the podcasts I used to listen to, which was called This Week in Startups, they were sponsored heavily by Masterworks. And I was like,
I love
got
This Week in
30,000
Startups.
Yeah, I'm like, they got 30,000 people on their wait list. What is this company? Because that's what they pitch in their podcast advertisements. And I learned that Masterworks, and for your listeners that aren't aware, Masterworks basically fractionalizes ownership of high-end art. So they make it easy for somebody to own, a small piece of a Basquiat or an Andy Warhol or a very, very high-end, high-value piece of artwork. And historically, artwork appreciates it. It basically outpaces the S&P 500, which is unreal to think about. So I thought, oh, that's a really cool idea. How is this legal? Because this feels like securities, and from my understanding, soliciting securities from non-accredited investors is illegal. So it's very hard to do. This is why most companies don't do it. And what I learned was they were using this really interesting filing framework called Regulation A. And what Regulation A essentially allows an issuer, in this case Masterworks, to do is to fractionalize ownership of any asset of value and make it easy for anybody to invest. And when I say anybody, meaning accredited, non-accredited, international, whoever. And it's a fairly new kind of filing framework, which is this Regulation A filing framework. So that was a big light bulb moment because I thought, not only could we make it easy for the average investor to invest in vacation rentals, but we can allow anybody. And when I say anybody, I mean the sales associate at Bloomingdale's, the Uber driver, a bartender at a restaurant, all the way up to a product manager at Google or somebody that's individually wealthy, really anybody, regardless of where they live or who they are. And that was a big light bulb moment of this, the perfect time for this asset class. And this new kind of fractionalization framework that's become very popular with the SEC has matured enough to kind of apply that kind of Masterworks fractionalization model to short-term vacation rentals as an asset class. So that kind of crystallized the go-to-market for here, which was fractional ownership, basically making it easy for anybody to invest, any amount of money into really the coolest way to invest in real estate today, which is short-term vacation rentals. We started marching on that idea in March to March, really March of 2021, I think is when we found it here. We've been on quite the journey since.
Yeah. And you and I talked about we talked with 2 months ago, kind of just doing a discovery and understanding everything. And a lot's changed, a lot's happened. And it's just really cool. I don't know. I want to go back because you got quite a few good points and some things mentioned that I wanted to touch on. One, I'm from the Pacific Northwest. I was just a little bit north of Seattle. So Yeah. Where are you based for the listeners that are,
Yeah,
curious?
just north of Miami, Florida, in a town called Merritt Island. So very close to like
Okay.
the Space Coast area.
Okay, cool. So yeah, the Pacific Northwest was a great idea, I think, for what you guys were doing with homework or homeworthy. Wow, sorry. Um,
No worries.
because it's a really beautiful area. So doing the drone shots, doing all the other stuff, all the
Mhm,
greenery, the mountains, the PNW. You got the good old
mhm.
PNW.
Agreed.
Um, talk to me about, because this is where it gets deep on Slick Talk. We go down the
Yeah.
story of everything, and talk to me about, because I think I was 19 or 20. No, it was 20, 21, 2021. I had a show for an event company. Year to date that I opened it, I shut it down, super depressed, highly in debt, um, attempted suicide, very low moments for you going through COVID and something that's super uncontrollable, right? Like we couldn't control, like you said, I remember exactly where I was. I was in London. It was like March something. And I remember President Trump said, we're going to national emergency, closing down the borders, we're shutting everything down, shutting down the country. And I was in a panic mode also because I just took another leap to go full-time entrepreneur. So for
Right.
you, you were already doing this thing. Your guys' you you didn't call it peak, but you're close to peak, perfect market fit time where you're
Finding
really,
parking lot. Yeah, we found the
yeah,
magic. Magic was
yeah,
found.
yeah. That's I don't know. I think the listeners on the show really appreciate the stories of founders and entrepreneurism because they themselves are in the same position, right? They find something they're passionate about. They find either product market fit or they're just on the tip of about to discovering it with, being a mad
Mhm.
scientist at the whiteboard, erasing things,
Sure.
writing new ideas, going new routes. And so for you, finding product market fit, then, March, April, May, and then having to lay everybody off, including yourself. Kind of walk me through that journey, because for a lot of people, I think it's really hard to pull themselves out of that.
Mhm,
And for you, you said that you wanted or needed to get re-inspired, so you started reading books or reading anything that you could.
mhm.
Um, what was the initial driver for that? Like just to get re-inspired, because I think a lot of people would have given up.
Yeah, it was really tough. So I went on. So let's start the moment that so so the full team, we had a full team meeting kind of the first week of April. After we realized our existing investors weren't going to support us through this time, I knew we had to make an incredible move quickly just to give us a chance to come back.
Yeah.
So, we do the full layoff with the team, including myself. Basically the entire everybody just goes on. I forget what we called it at the time. It's a very common word. What was the common word that
Yeah.
everybody used? Not forbearance. What was it called?
Oh,
Um,
I know what you're talking about. It's a weird word. I never heard of it until COVID.
Me
Um,
neither.
I know what you're talking about. It's it's on the tip of my tongue too.
I know, me too.
Uh,
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, we didn't
yeah,
call it a
yeah,
layoff because we were all doing it, but yeah, we were all crying. It was really hard. Probably one at the time it was the hardest moment of my life.
yeah.
And then I had to reduce my personal burn rate as quickly as possible. I
Mhm.
had a home that we rented month to month in Vancouver. Thank God it was month to month.
Yeah.
We had a car, we had kind of everything, and pretty quickly after this layoff happened, we just dumped everything. So we sold. We had two cars. We had two car household. Sold one of the cars, and then we packed a U-Haul and moved um, from Vancouver, Washington to Meriden, Florida, which is about 3,500 miles during
Mhm.
COVID, during peak COVID, where it was still very scary. It was very scary. It's
Yeah.
like there wasn't a lot of information out there, and the
Yeah.
majority of the hotels that we'd stay in, we didn't know if they were going to be open or not. At the time, a lot of hotels were closing. So it's just a scary time to be moving across the country when you don't have anything, uncertain about the future. And like we're towing a
Mhm.
U-Haul, I've got my daughter in the back, I've got my wife at the time, in the passenger seat, and didn't really know what the future held. And we get down to Florida, we end up moving into my grandmother's vacation house, which has like a lot of
Mhm.
like older lady furniture and like definitely not inspiring from a setting standpoint.
Yeah.
And I just immediately go into like full blown depression, like just I mean about as depressed as it gets. And naturally with that, sometimes it works out, and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes
Mhm.
people, like what you explained, like suicide, and just there's a lot of destruction that comes with depression. And,
Yeah. 100%.
at the time it was divorce for me. So, yeah, I was just really, really unmotivated and, couldn't get it back together. But, the divorce actually helped me because it brought a lot of, uh, motivation through necessity. Like I was like, okay, I'm going to be on my own. And we split the time with my daughter 50-50. So not only am I going to be on my own, but I'm also going to have to, um, really provide. And at this point, I'm on Washington State unemployment, so I'm getting like a couple
Mm,
$100 a week, something like that. And I
yeah.
knew that bomb was going to explode. Like it was going to run
Yeah.
eventually, that they're going to stop paying that unemployment.
Yeah.
But I don't have a lot of professional skills. I mean, like I've started companies, whether they're successful or not. I've started companies since I've been very young. And, in the mix between that, it was like working in the restaurant industry or,
Mhm.
working as a bartender, but not, 150, $200,000 a year tech employee salary, just
Mhm.
kind of like
Mhm.
average, blue collar salaries. And, I knew I was kind of screwed. I'm like, because Homeworthy wasn't going to work out. We couldn't get investors to back us to kick the lights back on. My team didn't want to come back to work. I had moved across the country to try and save money, and I'd have to move all the way back to kind of restart it. And by the way, I'm going through divorce, so that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there was all these ideas that like, okay, this is the end of the road for that. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I was driving down this like really beautiful road that runs along the river here and around where I live. And I remember one night I was just like crying pretty hard. And I was on the phone with my mom, and I was going through a lot of just like really, really tough conversations. And I was like, I think I'm cursed. Like, I think I'm stuck doing this. I think I'm stuck building. I think the way out isn't to get a job. I think I have to build my way out of this. And
Mm.
um, I remember that being a thing. I remember that being like a step in the moment of like the chapters of life. And that was a big one where, and my mom supported it. And I remember it was within the next week or two that I started to really just get like the gears spinning again. Like I was like, okay,
Mm.
like I got to do this. Like this is it, and um, again, started picking up books and articles and things like that. But the original idea for here, it really wasn't an aha moment. It was just like I have to work on something,
Yeah.
and this seems really exciting, and this seems like something that could be in a big market, and I know I can do it. So this is what you're going to work on. This is like me talking to myself from 30,000 feet. Like, well, this is it. This is what you're going to work on. And what's interesting is if you show up for something every day and work on it,
Mhm.
somehow it gets like encapsulated in your brain as like this is the thing that you do. And it became the thing that I do. And every day I'd work on the ear project. It was initially it was legal, and then it was trying to convince the people that supported me in Homeworthy to support the new project. And um, yeah, it was a tough road. I wouldn't be lying to you. And it
Yeah.
still is a tough road. But um, yeah, it was really that like realization that the only way out is to build, and it wasn't to just try and find another job or go
Yeah.
back to working in a restaurant or a hotel. Or it was you've got to build your way out of this, man. And
Yeah.
that was the realization.
Well, it's kind of crazy on what you just said on the like when you show up every day, it just kind of formulates in your head, right? Like this is what I'm doing. If you, I think a previous Slick Talk guest, Michael Chernow, who was also on the Gary V audio experience show, he has a podcast called Born or Made. It's now, or no, it was called Born or Made. He shifted it to something else called Creatures of Habit. But the question for all of his guests was, do you feel like entrepreneurs are born the way they are, or they're made through life events, through
Mhm.
decisions, through all this other stuff?
Right. Right.
And everyone would give their answer, oh, I think they're born this way. I think they're made like through their experience. And the common thing I've been hearing throughout my interviews with guests, and then even just through your story, I I don't know if it's really a born thing, but I think we're born to not give up and just show up. And like you said, in your head, you're just going through like, I just need to build. Like I just
I
need to
think you
do something.
I think
Go
you can
ahead.
create an entrepreneur. I think you can
Oh,
create one. I
I
think
do
it's
too.
I think it's very unlikely to learn to be one. but I think you
Yeah.
can be. I think you can be. Um, Not groomed is a bad word for this, but I think you
Yeah.
could be
Yeah.
groomed
Yeah.
into being an entrepreneur. Like, and the reason why I say this is because my dad was very unsupportive of me doing anything entrepreneurial. He wanted me to go to
Mhm.
college, very normal life structure. My mom was very counterculture about that. Was like, oh, you're gonna do something else. Like she's always said that you're gonna do something else. And I just like I've always just thought that she's just bullshitting me, and
Mhm.
like she just did it because I was dumb or I didn't get good grades in school or things like
Yeah.
that. But what's weird is it slowly built this kernel of an idea inside of me since I was a very young child that you're just gonna do something else. So you're not
Yeah.
meant for the normal stuff. Like you're not meant
Yeah.
for what you're supposed to do or what you go to school and then you got to go to college and then this and that. Like I just that wasn't part of how I was raised by and I was raised by my mom. My mom and dad were divorced. So
Yeah.
and I spent the majority of the time with my mom. So I think she is who turned me into an entrepreneur. I don't think I was
Mm.
born that way. And I don't think I learned to be one. I think I was just habitually told you're going to do
Yeah.
something else. It's like, it's okay. Your
Yeah.
grades aren't that good. You're going to do something else. It's okay.
Yeah.
And again, she may have been lying to me. I don't know, but it's working and it worked. So that's why I think like you can be born, but I think you can also be turned into one by
Yeah.
somebody that is, who you look up to, for example, is another
Mhm.
example, I would say.
100%. Yeah, what I was gonna say is that I think you're born with that initial, I think, starter. I know for me, growing up, I had a kind of similar kind of thing. My mom and dad weren't divorced, but my dad was very much, works, he's been at his job the last 25, 26 years. My
Mhm.
mom has her own business as a massage therapist. So like, I got to see both sides, like 9 to 5
Right.
to whenever
Yeah.
whenever she had the hours to go do it. And
Yeah.
so every time I was going through like middle school and high school and they're doing like your career days or this other stuff, military, granted, I did join the military, but like,
Yeah.
military, police officer, counselor, all these other like jobs that I was quote unquote,
Mhm.
wanting to do,
Mhm.
never worked out. My mom was just like, "Oh, you'll figure out something. It's going to be completely different than you'd ever expect, and it's just going to happen." And I was like,
Mhm.
"Whatever." Like, my friend Chris has known he wanted to be a firefighter since we were in kindergarten together, and all this other
Mhm.
stuff. Like, I would go through those
Yeah.
conversations,
Yeah.
and I think that there's a mix between the born and the made. I think, like you said, you can learn, not learn, but you can be, yeah, groomed to be an entrepreneur in a way
Yeah.
because
I agree.
of the people that are around you. And I think, just going back to your story,
Mhm.
the having to build your way out of this, I always find super interesting because the I think the hardest part for entrepreneurism and everything that you're building, everything that others in
Mhm.
different entrepreneurial aspects build, is that I I'm very fascinated by the passion of building because it does take a lot. It takes a lot of mental
Mhm.
capacity. It takes a lot of emotional capacity. It takes a lot of brain just capacity in the
Mhm.
sense of like
Mhm.
thinking and being strategic. And is this the right move? Taking chances, taking risk.
Mhm.
Um, so all the above for you. Do you
Yeah.
feel like after, let's say after here, like let's say here,
Mhm.
super successful, gets
Yeah.
acquired, goes public, whatever the exit
Mhm.
may be, do you feel like you will have to continue to build after that, or do you think that you'll be able to settle?
Yeah. It's a disease. I've I've
It's
I've
just,
compared it to a disease before
yeah,
because I
yeah,
don't think it should be I think it's almost like we should be like not indoctrinated, but I think there should be like an ADD, classification on
yeah,
entrepreneurialism because I do
yeah,
think I think it's a disease. And the reason why I say this is because um, uh, very early on here, right around when we launched, we got an acquisition offer.
mm,
I won't say who, I won't say where, I won't say, but it was
yeah,
enough
sure,
to more than anybody that has ever come before me in my family tree, would have seen in regards to numbers on a board.
yeah.
What's interesting is it felt like a second place trophy, and
Well, you
you'd
guys
think
just
it would
launched, so like that would be, there's
think
no,
about think
yeah,
about the feeling that you would feel if somebody came along and offered to buy Hospitality FM, like just
yeah,
let's say it was a ton of money,
yeah,
more money than you've ever seen or grew up with, and think about that feeling that you'd feel, and you would think from the outside looking in, it'd be like the equivalent of like the
you made
champagne
it.
popping emoji.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's like incredible. But what I thought was, okay, we just got started.
Mm.
We know this is going to be an exceptional product. We haven't even started marching on our mission yet.
Yeah.
We have to do this. But I still think if you fast forward 3 years in the future, 5 years in the future, 10 years in the future, I still think it feels like a
Mm.
second place trophy. And then
Mm.
what does that do to you? You still may sell, by the way. You still may
Yeah.
sell. You
Yeah.
still may exit. You still may whatever. But what do you think that does to you? You know what it does? It makes you build again. It makes you
Yeah.
build again because you're unsatisfied with the outcome. It's always this unsatisfaction with the outcome, and you have to build. So,
Mm.
yeah, I think you're stuck doing it. I don't think it's like this.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's inside you. I think it's you're stuck, and I'm not excited about it. By the way, I'm not. It's
Yeah.
not something that I'm like, woohoo! I get to do this for the rest of my life. Like,
Yeah.
it is a it just feels like a disease inside of you. Like it feels like something
Yeah.
that you're never going to get rid of. It's stuck inside you forever. You got to build. It's part of what you do. Now you have aspirations, you have duties as a parent, you've got goals, you've
Mm.
got things financially that you need to take care of. But at the end of the day,
Mhm.
like, I used to fight a lot with my ex-wife about this, which was I saw myself as a painter. I said I feel
Mm.
like a painter. I feel like I'm an artist. Like I feel like I'm a painter because I get so much pleasure out of building, and the rest of it I don't really care about. And
Mhm.
and I think about it in a creative way too. I think about it very creatively. I feel creatively satisfied building a company. And she used to fight me about it. And she'd be like, you're just a business person. I'm like, yeah, but it's not like that. Like to me, it's
No.
not like that. So I think that's why it's like a creative itch that you have to do. It's like painters always paint,
Yeah.
and some painters go mad painting. Some painters still lose their mind painting, just like, some that don't. So I think like that's how I see it. I think you're stuck. I think not all of us, but for me,
Yeah.
I'm stuck doing it forever. Um, and fortunately, this isn't a job where it's like a construction worker or somebody working
Yeah.
in like a coal mine where your body, it's going to run out of energy at some point or
Yeah.
joint, muscle, pain, whatever. It's like I get to do this for another, I'm 31. I get to do this for another probably 35, 36 years. And,
Yeah.
you know, that's fun to think about. Like, I do think that's fun, but the actual act of building is very hard.
Very, very
Specifically
much.
on your brain and relationships and heart,
Yeah.
and you name it.
Yeah, I was gonna say a good way that I see it as a visual thinker is I think of like Thanos from the Avengers, right? Like he's fighting intensively to get these, 5 stones to
Mhm.
then finally say I could finally rest. And
Mhm.
even I think we even see in like the Avengers, I forget if it
Yeah.
was Endgame or whatever. He's
Yeah.
rested, but he's not rested. Like you could see him looking out
Yeah.
into the sky and being
Yeah.
like,
Right.
he's not satisfied. He's alone. He's by
Mhm.
himself. Like he's
Yeah.
got nobody. He just
Yeah.
killed half the world.
It's just
And
yeah,
and
that's why I
at the
say
end
it's
of the
like
day,
a
like
disease,
yeah,
and
hundred
there's
percent,
no connection to money. I mean, no
hundred
connection to
percent.
money. I mean, everybody
Yeah,
thinks it's money. There's no connection to money. Like, I'm
yeah.
telling you, there's
If
no
anything,
connection to
yeah,
money.
yeah.
It's
On
just this, like, yeah, an unsatisfaction with the world,
yeah,
and then in your paintbrush is what fixes that, which is building. So,
seriously,
um, yeah, it's a weird feeling, to be honest.
for sure.
I don't, and whenever I talk to people that envy it, I'm like, I don't know, man. It
Yeah,
sounds, if you're happy with what you do, you brought up your friends like a firefighter is like born to be a firefighter. He knew since he was
yeah,
a child he wants to do it. Like, at least you know what you want to do, and like you're happy with that decision
yeah,
and your career path, and you're not wanting something else, and like you
yeah,
get to like it's very different. Like, I don't know, people that just get to enjoy life. I'm like, man, that sounds great,
yeah,
because I don't enjoy life. I just build and and yeah, it's tough.
yeah. Well, that's where I've kind of for me like we launched HFM in December of last year, 2021, and we've
Yeah,
already like over committed our numbers on what we wanted to do within the network, and so like all
right.
is good. But then my team, I'm like telling them the plans for the next year and what we're doing and where we're going, and they're like, what? Like, yeah, like we're gonna duplicate this over and over again, and we're just gonna keep going and building, and we're gonna sell to Spotify, and we're gonna
Mhm.
go like going down this
Yeah.
rabbit hole. And they're like, oh my God, I thought we're just like doing a simple podcast network. And it's like, we did in less than 6 months. So we got to keep going. So
Yeah.
I know what you mean. And like, dude, the hardest part is having conversations with like friends, other people in the world, whether you meet them working remotely or throughout
Mhm.
industry stuff, is like I don't think there's, because the number one question I get asked is like, what's your hobby outside of this? Like, I don't have a hobby. Like, this is kind of
Yeah.
what we jump into. And I'm sure you have the
Mhm.
same thing.
Yep.
And the biggest thing you kind of mentioned, stoicism, and
Yeah.
like how you were like looking for inspiration to get out of this depression field. A really good book I'll recommend to you and to anybody listening is a previous guest of the show on Slick Talk, Get Out of My Head by Andrew McConnell. And he talks about stoicism and like modern day wisdom and how we can learn from this and like what occupies our mental headspace or our mental real estate. Because a lot of us give it away for free. And so I'm like
Mhm.
going through this whole thing, and it's like it's helping me understand, like, as an entrepreneur, balance in my life, whether it's going on a walk in the morning with a cup of coffee and not turning on Slack or answering any emails or X, Y, and Z. Like, these things
Right.
actually are going to help me get to that point where I can enjoy life. Like, I need to enjoy life. I need to, think about like having a
Yeah.
relationship that is not just going to last until I get busy. And then when I get busy, it
Yeah.
goes completely cold. And we're always busy, but the thing of like making the time. And so, not to go on a rambling, but I
No, I'm
think
with you on
like,
this. I think it's
yeah,
highly important. I think if you go
yeah,
all in on work, not only are you gonna get burnt out, but it's just gonna kill
yeah,
you. So like, I think part of it's too of who you're with. I think if you're with somebody
yeah,
that is the opposite of like I exclusively, I'm with somebody now, but let's say it was in the future and it was I exclusively would not want to be with an entrepreneur because I think you both end up just this it's this like hedonic treadmill that nobody gets off of.
yeah,
And so you really need somebody that focuses on um, moment in time. And
for sure.
it's just like you almost need the polar opposite of you
Yeah,
in a way. Or you have to do things to trick yourself to do these things. So like make time to read, make time to go for a walk, make time for your
yeah,
hobbies. And you almost have to block them off and then make it to where it's like you have a boss and the boss says you have to do this. Because
yeah,
if you don't make it that serious, you're just going to skip it. You're going to
yeah,
skip it. And I do my own version of this. I have a rowing machine. I used to
yeah,
row every day, and I stopped putting it on my calendar for some reason, and now I've just stopped doing it. And it's just because
yeah,
like there the on the other side of me is like, dude, just you don't need to do that. You're fine. Like
yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
But you have to have like there has to be a boss that tells you you have to do this. Otherwise, you just ignore it. And you
100%.
ignore your hobbies, your things that make you feel peace, things like that. And otherwise, you just turn yourself into a lunatic that's just like working all the time.
Yeah. Definitely. I went on a month-long trip to Mexico, and it was supposed to be like a work remote slash like kind of vacation,
Yeah.
take work 4 hours a day instead of the 18 type
Nice.
scenario. Ended up not doing as much. I still worked about 8, 9 hours, but still
Mhm.
better than 16, 18 hours. And I remember coming back, and there was probably a couple first 2 weeks I was giving up alcohol for like a 30-day challenge. I was working
Mhm.
out, I was doing all these like routines.
Nice.
And I remember like after that month, it was like, oh, I caught myself doing not 18-hour work days, it was
Yeah.
like 20. And I would be 7 a.m. to like 8,
Yeah.
9, 10 p.m. At my computer, didn't eat, would go work out, would struggle with the workout, like
Mhm.
all this stuff. And I think you're 100% right. Like, you have to create your own boss in the sense of like put it
Mhm.
on your calendar, make it mandatory, make it from like a CEO or something like
Mhm.
that, that is telling you that this is your daily task of kind of
Yes.
taking care of
Yeah.
yourself. Because yeah,
And
it
you have to have like
it
you have to have rules too. Like I have rules for
100%.
myself. Like I don't do meetings in the evening. I don't get on calls in the evening. There's just like certain
Yeah,
things I don't do. And like there are exceptions. There are certain
yeah,
exceptions where once or twice a month I break those rules.
yeah,
But outside, because the problem is if you don't set rules and you end up working from 8 to 8. And yes, I know it's what's the word I'm looking for? It's encouraged and it's almost like hustle porn to do that.
yeah, yeah,
But yeah, I don't know. If you don't do it, you end up you're losing longevity. So now I've tried
for
to
sure.
focus more on longevity. It's like, okay,
Yeah,
I'm young. I know I'm gonna be doing this for a while. I know I love what I do. Like this is what I'm gonna be doing
yeah,
forever. So like
yeah,
let's preserve the vessel. Like let's make sure that
yeah,
you actually continue to do this and you don't go crazy in 5 years
for
because
sure.
you work like a maniac.
Yeah,
But yeah, the boss idea is just create like an external boss. It can even be another person, by the way. It doesn't even have to be
for
you.
sure.
There's an app that I just downloaded that I want to start using called Future. And
Mm.
Future's like it's like a exercising app, but you basically have like a personal trainer that just like bothers you all day, that tells you to like work out, blah, blah, blah. And like, I'm sure they're kind about it, but it's cool because
Yeah.
it's not having to go to a gym, but you have a personal trainer that's like checking in to make sure you're doing what you're doing. And they're
Yeah.
they're setting chat box. So it's nice having just like a third party that bosses you around for like activities that aren't related to work,
Yeah.
because it allows you to create that like that not transparency, that's not the word I'm looking for, that
Accountability.
accountability.
Yeah.
Yeah, that accountability around like if I don't do this, I'm going to let somebody else down.
Yeah.
Depending on the kind of person you are, like if I let somebody down, I feel great dishonor. So like I
Yeah.
have to do it,
For sure.
So you just have to like trick yourself as an entrepreneur to like, I don't know, you kind of have to play this like self-sabotage role in certain cases for positive outcomes.
Yeah. I totally agree. Um, I want to. I really enjoy the entrepreneurs talk, but I also know like the audience members are listening and are like, all
Sure.
right, we want to learn, we want to know more about here. So like
Sure,
with
sure, sure.
with what with the you okay, as I catch up on my words, started launching here about a year ago. You guys are now, as from what you and I talked about, you're about to launch in 3 markets. So what does this look like, launching in 3 markets?
Sure.
And as like a here entity, like what are you guys doing, what do investors expect,
Mhm.
what's the product, and kind of
Sure.
going into like what can the day-to-day or even just the overall process be
Yeah.
like?
So we incorporated officially last year, but we didn't. It took us almost a year to get SEC approval to just launch in general.
Yeah.
So we launched officially in March of this year. So it's been a couple months. We launched in one market, Clearwater, Florida, and that did pretty well. So we've received some really interesting feedback, and at the time, I think we had about 10,000 users on the platform, and now we have a little over 30,000, closing on 35,000 today. And we've been working with the SEC to qualify the next 3 markets on the Here platform, which are Joshua Tree, Big Bear, and Gatlinburg, Tennessee.
Mhm.
And we actually just got approval for those last week. And depending on when this podcast comes out tomorrow, we're launching Big Bear, which is going to be really exciting,
Yeah.
specifically a property called Moon Ridge. So,
Awesome.
yeah, so that's where we are today. In regards to how we think about markets and launching new markets, we focus on
Yeah.
destinations specifically. So, more of the Joshua Trees and Poconos and Hudson Valley and Great Lakes, things like that, and less of the big cities, Austin, Miami, Atlanta. So really focusing on these like small towns that have a lot of tourism that are like
Yeah.
beautiful destinations. They're kind of low supply, quasi, high regulation, or kind of very tough to build in those markets. Yeah, so the goal over the next year or two is to launch 20 to 30 new markets across the United States, and then eventually beyond the United States into South America and Europe. But in regards to how the product works, so
Can I ask you a
yeah,
question on here? When
yeah,
you guys launch a property, does here do the turnover, or how does the managing the guest and the cleaning and the supplies and maintenance, all that, how's that kind of
sure.
operate?
Great question. Yeah, so we contract with local property managers,
Mm.
cleaners, maintenance, etc., on the local level. So we manage the property at 30,000 feet, and then we select specific partners in each market. So in some markets,
Cool.
it may be Vacasa or
Yeah.
Avance. In other markets, it may be a local property manager that has deep roots, that's been around for many years. So generally, we try to work with the best and the brightest in each market, and they handle turnovers, guest communications, things of that nature. But here's responsibility on the asset level is asset management. So we're
Yeah.
responsible for managing those vendors as well as the asset itself. So those are things like issuing dividends and tracking appreciation and handling taxes and things of that nature on behalf of our investors on the platform. So that's how that's structured. And investors can invest as little as $100 in an individual property. So really anybody
Yeah.
of any walk of life can invest on here. And the entity structure is very interesting because we structured it to be identical to if a group of investors got together to buy a property. So
Mhm.
let's say you and I picked a property, and you said the Pacific Northwest is where you grew up. So let's say we picked a property in Seattle, for example,
Yeah.
and you own 50% and I own 50%. We set up an LLC to like hold that property together. Here is structured identically, except the difference is instead of there being two investors, there's hundreds of investors that
Mm.
own anywhere from 0.1% up to 20% ownership, or a little less than 20% ownership. So the structure is very interesting, because it's the closest thing you can get to true ownership. If not, it is true ownership. So the investors are entitled to anything that happens on the income level. So, if a property generates, $100,000 a year in net income, if you're an investor and you own 1%, you're entitled to 1% of those proceeds. The same
Mm.
goes for appreciation. So if the property appreciates, 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 over the holding time horizon, you're entitled to your ownership stake worth of those appreciation rights. So it's structured identically to if, the two of us set up an LC together to buy a property.
Yeah. That's really cool. And like, what happens if here like ever sell the properties, or is it strictly to get as many as possible, let them be cash flow positive, and let the investors earn from that? Or is there ever like a, hey, we got to 50 properties, we're gonna sell 10 and we're
Sure.
gonna go do this all over again?
Sure. So we plan to hold each property for 5 to 7 years. We know investors, generally, depending on your specific goals, have shorter liquidity time horizons. So you'd like to see a return much faster in regards to getting your capital back. So,
Yeah.
we're definitely working on a secondary marketplace where those shares, potentially in the future could be traded with other investors. So if
Mm.
you own, 150 shares of 123 Apple Street, you could sell it to, Sally, in a secondary transaction, very similar to like a stock market. There'd be a bid and an ask, and investors
Yeah.
would be able to trade kind of P to P, like peer to peer.
Yeah.
It's not currently available on the platform today, but it's definitely a roadmap item that we're working on.
That's really cool. And so
Yeah.
if like local or well-known property management companies, because a lot of the listeners from this show are heavy in vacation rentals, a little bit of hoteliers, a little bit of both, kind of hybrid operators. So listening, like, is there a place that you guys like? Do you, when you get a property in these destinations, are you the ones reaching out, or is there like a list that people can get onto to be vetted for a here property? Because the way I see it is kind of like here becomes the owner, and then the PM just does their normal thing, but they
Mhm.
report to here, which would be you guys.
Right.
uh
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it depends on the market. Like I said, we do have partnerships with like Avant Stays as an example.
Yeah.
So it depends on the market that we're in. We are building out kind of like a network of vendors in these markets.
Yeah.
We really need to build a page on the site dedicated to that. Right now, it's happening over email. But generally, we look for referrals. So when we buy the property, we ask the listing agent or the buyer's agent, whoever's representing us in the transaction, who are kind of the best and the brightest in that market in regards to
Yeah.
vacation rental management. And that's generally where we start. So that's where we
Gotcha.
start our search. But yeah, I would say like if just reaching out to hello at here.co is a great way to get introduced to the team. And we're somewhat secretive about new markets, so we don't
Yeah.
announce too far in the future. But
Which makes sense.
if if you're in a destination market, that's highly traveled, we definitely would love to talk to you.
Awesome. And for, I guess, one of my favorite closing questions would be,
Yeah.
as you've been going through this journey, coming out from Homeworthy to now here, what's been the biggest lesson or takeaway, or just something that you've really held close, that has kind of like helped you through this, or just kind of helped you get to where you are today? Is there anything in particular that just something like you would in 5-10 years be like, if it wasn't for this, I wouldn't have made this? Or is there just any kind of takeaways, or any um
Yeah.
thing close to your heart?
I think we touched on it a little bit earlier in the conversation, which is just like showing up every day, even if it hurts to show up. Because I think there's something to like repetition,
Yeah.
and you end up growing in credit. Like I'm trying to think of, like, they say it with like investing, like there's like this compounding thing. It's like as long as you invest a little
Yeah.
bit on a long horizon, you see incredible, yield in the future. Um, I think it's very similar to investing in yourself. So I think if
Mm.
I think if you show up every day and just like don't give up. Now the thing is, when I say don't give up, it doesn't mean like if a company's failing and you can't bring it back to life, you may have to give up. But
Yeah.
what I mean by don't give up is like don't give up on yourself.
Yeah.
So it's like don't be like, well, because this thing failed or because this thing isn't going well, I'm a failure. You have to
Yeah.
detach yourself from that. But I do think showing up every day, regardless of the situation or outcome, I think is incredibly powerful. I think it's a great way to build long-term strength as an entrepreneur.
100%. And outside of that, if you could give anyone that's listening one piece of advice, it could be outside of showing up and not giving up on yourself.
Yeah.
What would be one thing like through entrepreneurism that you would say is something that just to always keep in mind, or something to do or to look at, or whatever it may be? But what one little chunk or nugget be for the audience?
Um, Man, that's a tough question.
And I would
That's a tough
like to
question.
throw those
That's a
curveballs right at the end.
that's a tough one. I think if you don't read, I think reading is an incredibly powerful tool. I think it's a
Mm.
tool that like very much underrated. And reading could take many shapes or forms. It could be an audiobook, it could be physically reading, it could be reading
Yeah,
research report. Really, it doesn't have to be like by the book reading. But I think making time every day to read specific. I mean, it could be fiction, it could be nonfiction. It doesn't really matter. But I do think reading has contributed to most to my life. If anything, knowledge, whatever even just vocabulary. Um, reading is underrated. I think that's probably the big takeaway is that reading is incredibly underrated.
I like that. I'm a reader, but I also like to do the audiobook just because
Same.
it's more or less I could do it while I'm working out. It's like a podcast, you know.
Mhm.
You can
I'm not
you don't have
precious
to
about
have
it.
it.
I do
Yeah.
both. I'll read with the audiobook while reading. So I'll do like
Yeah.
listening while reading it. I'll also
I
just drive
retain
my
a lot
car.
better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I also don't
Yeah.
stop. So like I'm not precious about it. So like I'll also
Yeah.
listen
Yeah.
in the car while not reading and listening to the same
Yeah.
book that I was reading the night before. And like I still feel like I retain the information. I think as long
For
as you're doing
sure.
some combination of the three, which is like reading,
Yeah.
reading with audiobook or just audiobook, like um it's crazy what you can learn and how it expands your purview um
100%.
on on life or whatever you're working on.
Yeah. I totally agree. And that's what like that book that I recommended earlier. Andrew McConnell is a great guy, but like just having that moment to sit by the pool and read the book and cancel out
Yeah.
all the noise with like noise canceling headphones on or whatever, and
Yeah,
just be like,
certainly.
it was such a refreshing, like out of your head moment,
Right.
and no pun intended on the title, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's very refreshing. I highly recommend it. I hated reading as a kid, sucked at
Mhm.
school. So
Yeah,
to read now as an adult, I'm like, oh, this is weird. Like this is very
definitely.
weird, but it's a good thing. But
Yeah.
um Corey, also the last question we always end on with every guest is if you had one link, which you're not going to have just one link. We're going to link everything in the show notes as we
Yeah.
do for everybody. But if you had one link to send anybody that's listening to the show, wants to learn more about you, wants to connect, wants to learn more about here, where would you send them?
HERE.co. So here.co.
Perfect.
That's our website. Easy link to remember, easy link to go to. Don't go to
Yeah.
here.com. It'll send you to some, I'm not sure what they're doing over there, but not what we're doing. So go to HERE.co. So here.co. It's where you can learn more about here. It's where you can learn more about me and my team, and where you can get started investing in vacation rentals, whether you have, zero knowledge of real estate investing or a little bit. It's a great place to get started in the asset class.
I love it. It's such a fascinating time that we're in to see this happen. So I'm excited to watch and continue to connect with you, and hopefully we'll get to meet in person one of these days at a some kind of conference or event. But I think what you guys are doing is really cool. It's very powerful for millennials, especially those that can't actually buy a home at this current time and economic
Right.
state. So it's very much needed. So to see the gap in the market be filled a little bit with what you guys are building is really cool. So just want to say
Awesome.
thank you for being on the show. Thank you for doing what you're doing and sharing your story with us. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Will.
Of course. All right, Slick Talkers, you heard it here first. Make sure you check out here.co. Check out everything about Corey and his team, and we'll see you guys all again next week. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to our show partners for making Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast, possible. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we would love to connect with you outside of the podcast. So you can follow us on all of our social media channels for daily hospitality content, or find us on slicktalkthepodcast.com. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm your host, Will Slickers, and we will see you guys all again next week.